Hi, everybody. Today's Friday, December 5th, 2025, and our dear friend, Ambassador Chad Freeman, is here with us. Welcome back, Ambassador.
Very happy to be with you, Nima.
Please subscribe and hit like button, helping us reach in more people. And Ambassador, let me start with what Netanyahu said about the peace plan, the so-called peace plan, in his recent interview. It doesn't seem that they're going to get any sort of peace in the Middle East with this plan. But here is what Netanyahu, the way that he's describing the peace plan.
I think that the battering that the Iran axis received opens up many possibilities, but there's still some mopping up that has to be done. I think the most important thing about Gaza was first that the first phase of the plan was achieved, and that was what people didn't believe would happen. I believed, President Trump believed, and with a combined effort, military and diplomatic, that we were able to bring Hamas to give us all our hostages. We still have two left. One Israeli, one Thai citizen. We'll get them too. They're deceased, but the live hostages are out. The second phase is to disarm Hamas and demilitarize Gaza. I think there's a third phase, which is to de-radicalize the Gazan population from 60 years of incredible incitement, incredible brainwashing, which has really has to be changed. But the first phase is you've got to get rid of Hamas. Now, that is going to happen in one of two ways. It could happen with an international force that the United States is trying to put together, and I hope they succeed. And if not, as President Trump has said, and I've said, it can be done the easy way or the hard way. The hard way is that we'll have to do it. I hope we don't, because I don't want to spend more blood and treasure, especially blood, of the Israelis, or for that matter, of Gazans. But if it needs to be done, Hamas can't stay there, and they won't.
Well,
I don't see any. Do you see any possibility that Hamas, because Hamas is part of Palestinian Gazans, or many of them, without Hamas, what does it mean in living in Gaza?
well, first of all, he said the first phase of the peace plan was realized. Well, that was all about hostage exchange and ceasefire. There is no ceasefire. Israel is killing people every day. It's continuing to blow up buildings. So this is the most amazing thing is, of course, that the only way the hostages have ever been released is through negotiations with Hamas. All of the military force that Israel applied could not recover the hostages, and still can't. And the idea that somehow or other 2 years of warfare aimed at destroying Hamas, which failed, is somehow going to be, you're somehow going to accomplish that through diplomatic means is absurd. Hamas is the banner carrier of Palestinian nationalism in Gaza, and to a considerable extent in the West Bank. He didn't mention the West Bank, where Israel is busily evicting people, building walls, another separation wall in the Jordan Valley, and there's no peace. There won't be any peace. And frankly, Israel doesn't want peace. What it wants is Palestinian-free Palestine. No Palestinians in Palestine is its ideal outcome. And that's not going to happen. The Palestinians have shown an amazing degree of resistance to eviction from Gaza and from the West Bank. Meanwhile, of course, Israel is continuing to attack all its neighbors, and it's building buffer zones along its borders. Those buffer zones in the past have had a way of eventually becoming Israeli territory. So this is expansionism. And Israel seems to have no vision for coexistence with anybody in the Middle East. None. And therefore, it, in the end, will not be able to coexist with anyone in the Middle East. This is a recipe for continued armed conflict as far as the eye can see. And in the end, because nothing is forever, Israeli military supremacy is going to be overcome. So this is a vision of warmongering and war making. There's nothing about it that says anything about peace. And you're never going to get to phase two. By the way, phase two he described as disarming Hamas. It also had to do with Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. I noticed he didn't mention that because he has absolutely no intention of withdrawing. And as far as the international force is concerned, it's been obvious from the beginning. And it is becoming vocally obvious now from those who might have joined such an international force. They will not participate in disarming Hamas against its will. They want to be peacekeepers, not peacemakers, not pacification forces in Gaza. And basically what Israel's trying to do is to get somebody else to do the job in Gaza of finishing off Hamas and evicting the Palestinians that it has been unable to do on its own with American backing, strong American backing. So I don't see anything in this that justifies the policies that Mr. Netanyahu is following. He's following the same policies he's followed for decades. They haven't worked. They haven't made Israel more secure. They will not. And if he gets into another war with Iran, Israelis are going to feel the pain very directly in the Iranian reprisal.
Yeah, he's talking about disarmament of Hamas, and the third phase. He's talking. He mentioned, de-radicalization of Gaza. What does that mean? Does it mean that you disarm Hamas, then you're gonna go in and kill all of them? Because
no, I mean it's absurd. Basically, he blames the resistance for resisting Israeli incursions, abuses, human rights abuses, war crimes, murder, massacres, genocide. Supposedly, they should just accept that and love Israel because why? I mean, if Israel keeps doing hateful things, it will be hated. And that is exactly the drama that is playing out now in the West. There was an absurd statement by Hillary Clinton the other day, blaming anti-Israeli sentiment among American youth on TikTok, rather than on the things Israel is doing, which is what people object to. And as long as Israel continues to slaughter people, kill children, babies, burn people to death, destroy their housing, dehumanize them, treat them worse than animals, people are going to hate Israel. It's not a question of de-radicalizing anybody. If Israel behaved in a way that others could accept, they would accept it. But they won't accept a state that engages in mass murder and humiliation.
We had, an interview of the CEO of the Israeli-American Council, Ilan Carr, in which he says that we have to learn from what Israel is doing in the Middle East, in the West Asia, to do it here in the United States. Here is what he said, Ambassador, and I want to know, what is your interpretation of what he's talking about?
So we are living in a time of miracles and unprecedented opportunities, and the challenge for us here, and with this I'll end because this is key. The challenge for us here is to leverage Israel's successes into our successes and our victories here, because we are one people. Israel's weakness is ours and Israel's strength is ours. And now that Israel has turned the entire geopolitical situation on its head, our job in the diaspora is to leverage those wins and win here. Do to our enemies here what Israel did to its enemies there, and on that, the IAC is focused.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
Yeah. And
well, I have multiple comments about that. First of all, the idea that Israel's had successes is quite incredible. Israel is now a moral pariah nobody wants to have anything to do with it, except for legacy people and some elements of the Jewish diaspora. But a good part of the so-called diaspora, the word diaspora is a ridiculous word because it implies that Jews are not natives of the United States or Brazil or wherever, and that they're somehow in exile. Well, that is ridiculous. But anyway, the idea that Israel's had a success by committing genocide and then arguing that that should be done here in the United States is quite preposterous. But I will make a general comment. Israel has succeeded in one respect. It started out breaking international law, ignoring it, ignoring the United Nations, ignoring the international community, ignoring normal standards of human decency. And it got away with it because the United States protected it from the consequences of its behavior. That was a mistake by the United States. It did not do our reputation any good. But we've now gone farther. We've actually, as he suggested, adopted Israeli practices. Now, Americans are ignoring international law and normal standards of human decency. Now, Americans are adopting a surveillance and police state in which even citizens who, if they are not, if they don't look European, are subject to being grabbed off the street by people in masks who are federal officers and incarcerated. And a 7-year-old has picked up and taken to Texas from Vermont, I believe. Anyway, we are following Israeli practices, and they have been very damaging to Israel, and they are going to be, and they already are, very damaging to us. So this is an argument that is within the Zionist community. It may have some resonance, but frankly, ordinary Americans hearing that will be appalled, absolutely appalled.
Vladimir Putin is in India, and he was asked in his interview about Palestine. And here is what he responded to the reporters.
It's a complex issue that no one has managed to resolve over the years. Hence, it can't be fixed in just a few months by clicking a button. However, we should aim precisely at achieving this goal, establishing a Palestinian state. What has been done until now was done by President Trump. Naturally, primarily the return of Israeli hostages and Hamas took this step. I think, frankly speaking, this was the most important thing that was done as part of the latest steps for the settlement in Gaza. I believe it would be correct, perhaps, to think about the possibility of organizing the governance in such a way as to transfer all authority to the Palestinians. There are such options. They are being discussed both by Arab countries and the neighbors and beyond it. It's being discussed in the United States as well, I know it. As part of the United Nations, we have always taken part in this process. We will continue to do that with our friends.
Yeah. How do you see the position of Russia and together, even if we bring the China's position as well, because these are two important countries after all in the West Asia?
Russia, the position that President Putin just outlined is exactly what the international community wants. I mean, he made an emphasis, turn over the authority to the Palestinians. This means self-determination, which is the core issue for the Palestinians. He referred to a Palestinian state being established. This is what the world wants. The only opposition to that, really, is now from Israel and the United States. He correctly stated that the only real achievement President Trump has had in this context was a hostage exchange. The rest of the so-called Gaza peace plan is, as I indicated, is just not going to go anywhere. It's interesting to hear President Putin say these things because about 1/5 of Israelis are actually Russians. some of them with very dubious credentials as Jews. But Russia has an intimate relationship with Israel, and yet it takes a just stand on the Palestinian issue. China does the same, but it doesn't have the connections with the Israeli population that the Russians do, and also China, unlike Russia, Russia is an active diplomatic actor internationally. China practices strategic neutrality. It does not want to get entangled in other people's quarrels, and that works out very well for it. And it makes it possible for the Chinese, when conditions are ripe, to act as conciliators or mediators, as they did in the repairing the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran. They talk to everybody. They have made an effort to unify the Palestinians, who are very divided into different factions, quite understandably, in part because the Israelis have sought to divide them, in part because they are almost as fractious as the Israelis. The Israelis are very divided among themselves on almost every question. So are the Palestinians. So I thought that was an intelligent statement. And the final irony, however, is that India, of course, which is now in the grips of Hindutva, meaning Hinduizing ideology, has an excellent relationship with Israel, because Israel is anti-Muslim, and the principal enemy of India is Pakistan, which separated from the rest of India in order to have an Islamic homeland. So India is very anti-Muslim. It treats Muslims in its own country quite badly on occasion. There is communal violence, and that has made it, given it common cause with Israel. It also is, of course, a major purchaser of Israeli military equipment. I suppose one of the major developments from the Putin summit with Modi in Delhi is that India is buying S-400s, more S-400s air defenses. I think these are becoming quite popular. I don't know whether Iran has S-400s yet, but it certainly has S-300s. And the characteristic American reaction to this has been sanctions. So, for example, when Turkey made that purchase, the United States sanctioned Turkey. I don't know what the reaction will be from the Trump administration to the familiar demonstration that India and Russia have a special relationship.
And they're in the process of buying a submarine from Russia as well.
Well, they've done this in the past. The Russians actually have leased, or the Soviets leased, nuclear submarines to India, which is now building its own. But of course, Russian technology is still far in advance of Indian technology. And India aspires to control the Indian Ocean, which it believes should belong to it, in effect. I don't think the fact that it's called the Indian Ocean means that India has any special privileges there. But anyway, yes, weapons trade is a big factor. It's clear that India is going to continue to buy Russian oil one way or another, despite the American sanctions. It's also clear that Russia has very rapidly reorganized its oil trade. There really is no diminution in Russian oil exports. Maybe they're getting a little less money for their oil, but it's still being exported to countries that need it.
How when you see Modi goes to the airport, goes to upon when Vladimir Putin landed in the airport, Modi went there personally to welcome him. And these what is the diplomatic messages of these sort of scenes that we're witnessing these days? Because it's not, we've seen it between Russia and China right now. Modi is doing this, and what is the perception on your part, because you analyze these sort of behaviors?
Well, this is an indication of a special relationship, which is long-standing between India and the Soviet Union and now the Russian Federation. Normal protocol would have the foreign minister go to the airport, not the chief of government or state. So, for example, when Macron arrived in Beijing recently, he was greeted by Wang Yi, the foreign minister, not by Xi Jinping. Of course, he met with Xi Jinping. But this is a special gesture, which is permitted by protocol, but not required. And it's a signal to the world that India values the relationship with Russia very highly.
Yeah. Shifting the gear, Ambassador, to the talks between the United States and Russia. Donald Trump sent Steve Witkoff together with Jared Kushner to Russia, talking with Vladimir Putin, Ushakov, and Kirill Dmitriev. And on the same day, it seems that Lavrov was in China. And how do you see the current situation with the talks between the two parties? And we've seen some sort of panic in Europe or maybe in the United States. I don't know if you saw John Bolton talking about that Donald Trump is selling out Ukraine. I don't know what does that mean, selling out Ukraine. And let me play the clip in which John Bolton arguing that Donald Trump is doing this. Yeah, I forgot to bring it up.
Write a piece with the Telegraph talking about Trump and your view selling out Ukraine, but the headline there says, but the tide may be turning. So perhaps pick up on that part of it if you can.
Well, I think by this point, enough Republicans in Congress have seen that there really isn't any hope that Trump is going to look out for American strategic interest here. He's looking for a Nobel Peace Prize. It's just as straightforward as that. He doesn't care what the substantive terms of the agreement are, so long as he can declare success. And I think there's still enough Republicans in Congress and plenty in the country who oppose the Russian aggression, who think it harms vital American national interest and peace and security in Europe. And I hope, as has been emerging over the past 30 days, that more Republicans in Congress are prepared to disagree with the president in public. That's the hope I have.
What will that lead to?
Yeah.
Well, this is interesting because, of course, the Bolton argument is entirely about domestic American politics. And he cites vital national interests of the United States in Ukraine, but does not define them. That is because it's very hard to identify such interests. Must Ukraine be in the American sphere of influence? Do we have to have weapons on the Russian border, not just in the Baltics, but in Ukraine? Do we have to have a hostile posture toward Russia indefinitely? Is there no possibility of striking agreements with the Russians? Well, there clearly isn't if you don't talk to the Russians. And the Europeans don't talk to the Russians. The Republicans don't talk to the Russians, other than President Trump, which is to his credit. On the Witkoff-Kushner talks in Moscow, I was not at all surprised that 5 hours of intense dialogue did not produce an agreement. The so-called peace proposal, whether it's the original one that Kirill Dmitriev and Stephen Witkoff worked out in Florida, or whether it's the modified, several modifications, several versions of it floating around, it was basically walked back in many ways by the Europeans in a meeting in Geneva with Marco Rubio, who is known to be a hardliner on these things. I'm not surprised it's completely unacceptable to the Russians and to the Ukrainians. There's a basic principle, which is you cannot gain at the negotiating table what you have lost on the battlefield. Ukraine has not lost the last 14% of Donetsk or all of Zaporizhia or Kherson. And it will not give up at the negotiating table what it has not lost on the battlefield. Of course, it will lose those areas on the battlefield. The Russian advance is now increasingly swift. I just read an item by Larry Johnson, with whom I know you have frequent chats, which pointed out that in November alone, Russia took territory from Ukraine that is twice as large as Gaza. That is not insignificant. And the Ukrainian armed forces are crumbling along the battlefield. They don't have the manpower. The combination of battlefield deaths and woundings and desertions, about half of the Ukrainian army is apparently absent without leave, means that Ukraine's manpower is declining. The numbers are going down, not up. And the weapons can't reach the battlefield except by drone. They are being resupplied by drone. And there is now another cauldron forming around near Pokrovsk, which has been taken by the Russians, notwithstanding Ukrainian denials. And about 1,000 Ukrainian troops are trapped in that. And they're going to have to surrender. So the Russians learned early on that they should treat surrendering Ukrainians well. I'm sure there were some exceptions in the heat of battle or in its immediate aftermath. But for the most part, they treated their prisoners of war very well. And they have been willing to exchange them with the Ukrainians at a ratio of 38 Ukrainians for every Russian. So you can tell how the battle is going. It's not going in favor of Ukraine. So what John Bolton just said is completely divorced from reality. Ukraine is not going to get back the territories mostly inhabited by Russian speakers who don't want to be Ukrainian, that given the attitude of other Ukrainians, which is to persecute them and forcibly assimilate them, Ukraine's not going to get that back. And it's going to lose more territory, and it's doing so as we speak. So the question is, do you want to save Ukraine from complete disaster? If you do, you better come up with a peace plan. And here, I would just say about the Europeans, they are absurd on this issue. They trash Trump's peace plan, which I agree is imperfect in many ways, profiteering. I mean, he proposes to grab $100 billion of Russian reserves and then share the profits from applying those to Ukrainian reconstruction on a 50-50 basis. So I understand the European objections, but if they have objections, where's their peace plan? What do they propose to do about this? The only things they propose are more fighting by Ukrainians. They don't have the money. They don't have the weapons to keep the Ukrainians fighting. The Ukrainians don't have the manpower. So this is fantasy land. And the victim of it is Ukraine, not Russia, not the United States, not Europe, Ukraine. Ukraine is losing people at a huge rate, and it is losing the war. It has lost the war. It is losing territory because it won't make peace. And it is in its interest to make peace, even if it won't give up, understandably, those territories it hasn't actually lost. There has to be a negotiation. And the negotiation has to start between Ukraine and Russia. But let's remember, the last time Ukraine and Russia sat down to negotiate, Ukraine did a surprise attack called Spiderweb with trucks that turned out to have missiles in them. And So to negotiate with Ukraine is apparently to risk a surprise attack rather than a serious discussion. So this is a mess. And I'm not surprised that Witkoff and Kushner did not succeed in selling the Russians on the modified peace plan that they put forward.
Looking at the behavior of Europeans, you see no positive sign coming out of what they're talking about, because right now it seems that they're planning for by 2027 to block, any importation of Russian energy into European countries, which we know how that would influence, for example, Hungary, Slovakia. They don't like it. They want Orban in his recent visit to Russia, he was talking about the security and how Russia is a reliable partner in terms of providing them with energy. How do you think that they're planning for a long and continuous war in Ukraine when they're talking about 2027?
Well, they hope for that. That's the only answer they have to the situation. As I said, they don't have a peace plan at all. Cutting off energy while raising military budgets, and it weakens the economy. So Germany is having its economy hollowed out because energy prices have made German products largely uncompetitive. France is in a better position because it relies heavily on nuclear power rather than imported energy. But you have to ask yourself the question: is Europe more secure depending on Algerian oil and gas or oil and gas from the Persian Gulf than from Russia? I don't recall the Russians cutting off energy exports. I think we did that with blowing up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and putting sanctions on Russia. But there's a more fundamental point here. Kaja Kallas, the foreign policy spokesperson for the European Union, has said, well, wouldn't it be wonderful if Russia broke up into a bunch of smaller countries? That would be easier to handle. That got me to thinking, I don't think the Russian Federation is in any danger of breaking up. But NATO is in a danger of breaking up, and so is the European Union. We've already had Brexit. Now we have the alienation of the Hungarians and Slovaks by Brussels. We have within NATO very different policies, European defense policies. Spain has one position, Germany another, France yet another, Hungary yet another, Ireland yet another. It's a member of the EU but does not support this war in Ukraine. And not a member of NATO. So actually, Europe is setting up the conditions for its own breakup, not that of the Russian Federation. And a final point, Ursula von der Leyen says, well, it's inadmissible to change borders or take territory through the use of force. But she doesn't say that with regard to Serbia, from which NATO, the United States, and her country, Germany, detached Kosovo. She doesn't apply that rule to the Israelis, who are annexing land wherever they can, and in a search for Lebensraum in the Middle East. She applies it only to Russians. This is a sort of double standard and unreasoning position that makes Europe really laughable as a foreign policy actor. Europeans seem to be determined to remain less than the sum of their parts. And as long as they do that, they may have many of the characteristics of an geoeconomic superpower, although they qualify that by their own internal divisions. But they're not a political superpower, as they should be. And I think the world would be better off if Europe were a political superpower that could hold its own in the competition with the United States, with China, with Russia, with India, with other countries or alliances. But it's not making any moves in that direction as far as I can see.
Yeah. You mentioned Kaja Kallas. She was asked by a reporter if it's time for Europe to have its own Steve Witkoff in the negotiations, in the talk with Russians, together with you know Kushner. I don't know the American team. And here is what Kayakala said, Ambassador.
Wouldn't be at this point perhaps useful to open direct negotiation with Moscow and send there a kind of a European Witkoff? Thank you.
Well, everybody has been very clear, especially the Russians, that they have no interest in peace right now. So again, I mean, we need to put them in the position where they need to negotiate. Right now, they are not in that position because they think that they can outlast us, and they also hope that there's a very good offer made because they see that there's a lot of pressure to put on the victim, but none really sacrifices asked from them. At least we don't know that any of the sacrifices have been asked for them. So clearly, I mean, they want to negotiate with those who are just offering them something on top of what they already have. This is clearly their interest, but it shouldn't be ours.
Ambassador, what's so amazing to me that she's talking the way that she's talking about Russia. It's exactly what Europe is doing. It's not negotiating. It's trying.
Exactly. That's one of those classic statements where up is down and black is white, and all the merrier we go. No, of course, the statement Russia doesn't want peace, Russia doesn't want to negotiate is quite ridiculous. This war began with a Russian demand for negotiations, which the West refused. When Russia did negotiate with Ukraine at Istanbul in March of 2022, the West, in the person of Prime Minister Boris Johnson of Britain, intervened to persuade them not to go forward with the negotiations and not to make peace. So basically, this is a backhanded way by Ms. Callas of saying we want the war to keep going on. We don't want it to stop. And the statement that somehow, the Russians want more than they already have, well, that is normal in negotiations, I think. I mean, I don't think you go into a negotiation and say, well, I got everything I want and I don't want any more, and you don't have to do anything because I've already fixed the problem. I don't see that. But the underlying assumption that somehow Russia is not going to continue to take more is completely wrong. And it is a fantasy. And I don't know what dream world she is living in, she and her fellow Europeans. This is not a strategy. It's a hope. And hope is not a strategy. It's wishful thinking.
Yeah. Ambassador, you mentioned Macron being in China. How do you see the role of, it seems that Macron is doing the same thing that Olaf Scholz was doing when he was the Chancellor of Germany, and right now he's in China trying to convince China to play somehow a balanced role in Ukraine. What do they want from China that it would be possible for China to do?
Well, I think it's largely motivated by trade interests. I mean, he has quite a high-powered business delegation in his entourage, and France, however, although he's there, he says in a purely bilateral context, he's also talking about China's relationship with Europe as a whole. This is a very Gaullist position, a very typically French position. And it goes back to the point I was making about the fact that it's more likely that Europe will break up than that the Russian Federation will. I mean, France is not at ease with the position of Germany at the moment. That partnership has become more difficult. So I don't know exactly what will come out of this. Obviously, Macron hopes that the Chinese will put pressure on the Russians to end the war in Ukraine, but that won't happen. The Chinese have been studiously non-belligerent in this. They're not belligerents. Actually, most of Ukraine's drones, people don't seem to be willing to see, are made from Chinese parts. So, of course, Russians use Chinese parts. So do the Ukrainians. Europe and the United States have not given any incentive to China to put pressure on Russia because basically the thesis is if the United States and NATO can stabilize the situation in Ukraine, then we will go after China. So why should China agree to take the pressure off Russia so that we can put it on China? That's the fundamental problem here.
Yeah. Ambassador, recently you've sent me a speech note, a text about your take on China and what's going on with China, and the title is "Ceding the Future to China." What is going on in terms of the relationship? In my opinion, there should be some sort of mutual understanding between the United States and China, because the future would be bright if these two superpowers can understand each other and their objectives and how they can cooperate, compromise with each other.
Well, I think the Chinese very much want that. They don't want the tense, hostile relationship that has developed between them and the United States. They have a problem called Taiwan, which is a province of China to which the defeated side in the Chinese Civil War retreated under American protection. They would like to see a negotiated resolution of that issue. The United States, although it claims it's for a peaceful settlement, basically stands athwart such a settlement. So there is that issue. But at Busan, when President Trump met President Xi Jinping, they did so as equals. This is a first. And it seems to me that Trump implicitly admitted that the United States can't outcompete China and can't win a war with it. But he surrounded himself with people, China hawks, who've never been to China, who've never studied it, don't know the language, don't know the history, but believe that they know everything they need to know about China. It's all a priori reasoning on their part. And China, they mirror image China. It will behave like the United States. It will pursue manifest destiny. It will expand. It will become the global hegemon and so forth. Of course, there's no real evidence for that. In fact, the United States has abandoned leadership on quite a range of issues. COP30 in Belém did not have an American presence. But the Chinese, even though they're doing important things in combating climate change within their own borders and in developing technologies that are key to reducing the rise in temperatures on the planet, they're not taking the lead in crafting new solutions. They're not doing that with regard to trade and investment regulation. I mean, they'd like to see the WTO, World Trade Organization, come back, and they are working with other members of the BRICS to replicate the World Trade Organization rules, but they're not doing anything very innovative. And on the issue of nuclear non-proliferation, they're clearly aligned with the United States in opposing it, but they're not taking the lead. And so I don't see the Chinese reaching for global overlordship. I think they don't want the responsibilities or the burdens that come with that. They don't want to replicate the American role in the world. Whatever they do, it will be consonant with their interests as they see them, and they will try to minimize their liabilities and maximize their assets internationally. So what's happening really is not what the narrative in the United States proclaims. That China is aggressively trying to displace the United States from global leadership. No, the United States is removing itself from global leadership, withdrawing from international organizations, sanctioning some, abandoning international law, the UN Charter, adopting Israeli standards of behavior rather than those of the global community, and doing things economically that make no sense. Tariffs that raise prices, not just for consumer goods, but for inputs to manufacturing, make American manufacturing more expensive, less competitive. We are disinvesting in our educational system. We are severing the very productive partnerships between the federal government and research universities. We are deporting people who are essential to our conduct of normal business. We have created an atmosphere where 3 out of 4 American scientists, whether they're native born or foreign born, apparently have thought about or are thinking about leaving the country. This is not a formula for competitive approach to China. We should be competing with China. China's successes should be stimulating us to reform and do more, but they're not. Instead, we're retreating. The bad news here for you in Brazil is that we may be retreating to the Western Hemisphere. And just the other day, the Trump White House issued what they called the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which is a very bellicose doctrine, statement of doctrine that respects American sovereignty, but nobody else's. And we see now with Venezuela, with Colombia, with other countries in the Caribbean Basin or Central America, an effort to intervene both militarily and politically. We just released the drug kingpin, former president of Honduras, even though he was serving a 45-year sentence for many tons of cocaine coming into the United States. We just supported the faction in Honduran politics, hope to get them into the presidency, which is associated with that man who's now going home to Honduras. And meanwhile, we're engaging in boat murders. Boat murders are the new thing. And of course, that has now become very controversial with Secretary of Defense, so-called Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, probably not very long for his job. I mean, either Trump dismisses him or he resigns, or there might even be an impeachment of him by the Congress because he's done things which even Republicans who normally are in lockstep in support of the Trump administration object to. So that is basically murdering innocent people or people who may be innocent, we don't know. No due process, just murder. And the specific incident that is bringing him down is back in September. The first strike against a speedboat left 2 survivors. The strike against the speedboat was a war crime. It was an act of piracy, illegal under international law. But international law and the US military code requires the rescue of survivors of attacks, not their murder. And yet Hegseth apparently wanted no survivors left. And it appears that the admiral in charge of Southern Command and these operations, Admiral Halsey, resigned because he did rescue 2 people one from Colombia and one from Ecuador, and disagreed with Secretary Hegseth on the grounds that his orders were illegal orders that should not be obeyed. So there's quite a controversy going on, and it reflects the abandonment by the United States of deference to the rule of law.
Ambassador, looking at China today, in my opinion, China has totally changed the whole game. You know, their attitude in terms of making new partners and comparing that with the United States foreign policy for such a long time in the aftermath of World War II and the aftermath of the Cold War. You see, you know, militarization, some sort of sending here, more than 800 military bases around the world, which didn't produce anything for the United States, looking at what has happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, West Asia, right now in Ukraine. But on the other hand, you see everywhere that China goes is benefiting from, you know, what they're investing in. For example, in Africa, what they're doing in Africa, it's a long-term strategy on their part. You know, one is the United States going to accept that the militarization attitude, you know, this sort of attitude has failed, they have to change it, or they're going to double down?
Well, I think American voters in 2024 thought they were electing an administration that was going to do that, that was going to reduce the American military footprint internationally, that was going to exercise restraint in foreign policy, to not take on new commitments or start new wars, end wars. President Trump promised to be a peacemaker. He's instead been a warmonger. No example of that exceeds the example of the attack on Iran in concert with Israel. The support for Israeli genocide in Gaza, the failure to oppose Israeli depredations in Syria in an effective way. Apparently, he is at odds with Prime Minister Netanyahu about the Israeli bombing of Syria and the Israeli inroads into Syria. Anyway, point here is it's no contest. China now is the driving force in the global economy. It's where most of the growth comes from. It is 1/3 larger than the United States in purchasing power terms. It is the home of over 1/4 of the world's scientists, engineers, technicians, and mathematicians. It has the largest diplomatic service in the world. It's present in more places than any other country. It is, as I said, it exercises strategic neutrality, so it is able to talk to everyone. It does not become bogged down by taking sides in their quarrels. Many people find that objectionable. They wish, for example, in West Asia, that the Chinese would support them rather than take a neutral stand. But China's making friends. It's burnishing its reputation, in part because, unlike the United States, it doesn't insist on imposing its own system or its own ideas on its partners. In the past, China's been criticized for being indifferent to the political order in other countries or the human rights situation or whatever. It just doesn't get involved in that. And that enables it to lead by example. There is, in Chinese philosophy, associated with Confucius, someone named Mencius, or Mengzi in Chinese. And he made the very important point, which I think for a long time the United States understood instinctively, that the way you can exercise influence most effectively abroad is to set a good example at home. And if you set a good example, people will want to come and learn from you. How do you do that? How are your successes achieved? The United States is not achieving many successes these days. China is achieving many. Of course, China has many problems. It has economic problems, has social problems, problems with minorities, problems with some of its neighbors, for example, both Koreas, a fractious relationship with India, border issues, a pretty stable relationship with Vietnam, because the Vietnamese have learned over the course of several thousand years how to manage their relations with a much bigger country to their north, and they do so very adroitly. They don't surrender to China, but they don't antagonize China. So we see China emerging as the leading force in the Pacific Asian economy, and with a very good relationship even with the rising superpower of Indonesia. And we now have a government in Seoul, in South Korea, which is interested once again in pursuing cooperative relationship with China. North Korea seems to be on a different course, having cast its lot with Russia. But the Chinese, they're not doing everything right, but they're doing many things right. It's hard to find very many things the United States is doing right at this point.
You remember, Mass, before wrapping up, you remember when Donald Trump, the Trump candidate, before being elected, he was talking about the sanctions, how devastating sanctions are in terms of the relationship between, for the case of Iran, for the case of Russia, and the whole situation that these countries are somehow, we don't need them to be our enemies. But right now, it's not just about Iran and Russia and other countries being sanctioned, even India, Europe, Canada, but also he's putting sanctions on those people who are fighting for justice, specifically for the case of Gaza. We had, Francesca Albanese. She was sanctioned by the United States, the President of the United States. Here's what she said about the situation she's in the case of sanctions.
Refused to reimburse me. I have a private medical insurance, and they refused to reimburse me because I'm sanctioned by the U.S. The European Union Parliament invited me for a talk recently. They booked a room for me, and it was cancelled because it was on my name.
Wow,
Even financial transactions that have nothing to do with me, but have my name on it. For example, you try to transfer £1 or $1 or €1 to your friends with my name in it.
Wow.
It won't pass.
Yeah, it's huge, for personal experience. It's so much.
Well, it is such an abuse of power that it is generating a backlash against the dollar and the weaponization of it, which is cresting. I think, by the way, Francesca Albanese should have won the Nobel Peace Prize. She clearly qualified by her courage, by her principles, by her honesty, by her efforts in the face of enormous opposition, which she just described. I think when you mentioned that Donald Trump's affection for sanctions and tariffs, this is a fallacy that goes back to, it's a kind of fallacy that narcissists have. Thomas Jefferson, who was admirable in many respects, thought that if we cut off trade with the UK, that would bring the UK to its knees. Instead, they invaded in the War of 1812. They burned the White House and captured the Capitol. And we got a poem from it about bombs bursting in air in Baltimore, which became our national anthem. Woodrow Wilson famously believed that sanctions were a more powerful tool than war. That you could bring a foreign country to its knees, force it to do anything you wanted if you sanctioned it. Well, that didn't work. It didn't work at all. In fact, applying that philosophy to punish Japan for its depredations in China from 1931 on, the only result of that was to cause the Japanese to attack Pearl Harbor. it backfired completely. And they're still backfiring. This is a philosophy of foreign affairs that is totally dysfunctional, and yet we seem to be wedded to it. Why? Because people who put on sanctions always succeed in what they really want to do, which is to show that they're on the right side as they see it, and impose the penalties on someone else. So if you do tariffs or sanctions, who pays? Not you. You're a politician. Businesses pay. Individuals pay. Other countries pay in the case of sanctions. So it's a cheap shot, but it doesn't accomplish anything. There's no record of sanctions ever producing regime change. We're now planning to attack Venezuela, apparently, because 2 decades of sanctions have failed to change the regime, predictably. So I don't think much of this turn in American policy. And the unfortunate part, just to end, is that everything that we've done, export controls, tariffs, sanctions, boycotts, and so on, the Chinese have learned from us, and now they're doing it. And so what we started is now becoming universal. And this is back to the law of the jungle. Yeah. Might makes right. There are no rules. And I think we are beginning to regret that. We will regret it more as time goes on.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Glad to chat with you. Always interesting.